Sonnet 2 by William Shakespeare. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say, within thine own deep-sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count, and make my old excuse. Proving his beauty by succession thine, this were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feel'st it cold. Now, I really like Sonnet 2, but what's very funny is I have yet to either meet a woman or hear a woman's response to the poem that actually likes this poem. Well, what Shakespeare's doing here, I don't know what this tradition is called, it surely has a name because a lot of poets do it, is convincing his love to sleep with him in a sort of... This one is not as jokey as it could be. Like, I'm thinking of John Donne, who wrote poems like The Flea, where he's like, well, this flea bit you and it bit me, so our blood is intermingled, therefore we might as well have sex, you know, because our juices are mingling together anyway. That's a bit more jovial and absurd. This one, by the very nature of what Shakespeare's saying, I mean, obviously he's trying to convince his love to go to bed, but he's really... I don't know if he's trivializing it or if he actually does want a child, but it's quite a serious situation to say, well, you know what? You're going to be ugly, or at least you're not going to be attractive anymore. Your beauty's going to fade because in 40 years' time, you'll probably be, I don't know, 55, 60, 65. So wouldn't it be amazing if you could extend your beauty by having a child? And then, because people will say, oh, she's old, so she's got her beauty in her eyes. And what's great is he says here, then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes. So I like that he rhymes lies with eyes. And he's saying, well, that's a lie. You know, we always say this to old people, well, they have lovely eyes. But he says, like, that's a cop-out because they're deep sunken. They're just as tired and old and haggard as the rest of you. So you might as well have a child because your child's going to be young and have beauty, and you can say, well, I'm beautiful because you can see my child's beautiful. So I can tell why many women probably wouldn't want to receive a poem like this because, well, not only is it trivializing or potentially trivializing some very serious issues, but it's kind of saying that a woman's entire worth is wrapped up in her beauty and her looks, which I imagine many women don't like the idea of. Interesting, we can talk a little bit about the form as well, because the Shakespearean sonnet, there's many different types of sonnets that you can write, but the Shakespearean sonnet kind of goes with a rhyme scheme that's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So basically alternating rhymes ending on a couplet. And it's in iambic pentameter, so that's 5 beats in the line, da-dum, 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 da-dum. And also there's this idea of a turn or a volta. So the cool thing about sonnets is they're kind of like the poetic version of would we say a symphony, like Beethoven's symphony or a sonata or something like that? But basically it's an entire argument, and somewhere in the argument, usually around line 8, you have something called the volta, which is Italian, means turn. And that's where the argument up until that point suddenly derails a little bit and there's a bit of conflict. Oh, I think this, I think this, I think this, but. And then usually you do get a word like but or however or yet, and that indicates a change of mind. So it's quite dramatic as well. So we can see this here where he's talking about, well, look, this is how old and tired you're going to be when you're, elderly. But here's your child, and if That's a good one as well. That's a good turning point. Now, I think if we're talking about love poems, and the sonnets are love poems, they're meditations on love. If we're talking about love poems that a woman might like to receive, I think my favourite sonnet would probably do the trick, and that's Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising, from sullen earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered, such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. I think that's a lot nicer, because that's basically Shakespeare saying that when everything goes to shit, everything goes tits up, thoughts of you keep me warm and make me think, oh, it's not so bad. Maybe I'm having a terrible day and I'm like, well, you know what? I wish I was as good an artist as this person, or I wish I had more money, or this or that, and I don't. But then he starts remembering you. And I think that is one of the nicest, most touching sentiments, really, because to say that somebody makes your bad day good just by the mere thought of them, I think is lovely. I think that's a more charming sentiment than, well, when you're old, you better have a child because you're not going to be beautiful anymore. But one of my favourite lines in this is, trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries. And I love that poetry can do this. If we glide over the lovely assonants like deaf heaven, it's interesting that that share the same sound, deaf heaven, because he's talking about sound. By drawing attention to the shared sound, you're reminded of ideas of no sound and deafness. But that's not what I like about this line. What I like is this idea of bootless cries. And the thing is that this is metaphorical language, this is an image, this is something that I can't really see many other art forms doing very well, at least not the visual art forms. And writers, have pretty much since the beginning of the time, but at least in the last 1,000 years, have become increasingly distressed by the thought that they can never faithfully represent reality. They search for limot jus, that's a Flaubertian idea where you've got the perfect word, and that word conjures up all the visuals and sentiments and ideas that you want to conjure up. But writers have always been anxious of this idea that they can't fully, faithfully represent reality. But that's not what writing does well. That's not what poetry does well. It's not what any sort of art form using words does well. What it does well is this idea of you can have bootless cries. Cries can't be bootless. When you cry out to heaven, there's nothing in that cry that's bootless. But Shakespeare talking about the bootlessness in the cry. There's a cry that in the tone of it and perhaps the noise and the stress that's coming through indicates that he's bootless. His cries are bootless, but he's also bootless. I can imagine him maybe a bit like Lear, King Lear on the heath, derobed and imploring heaven to drown him and rage and blow. And so we're really drawn to this idea that he hasn't got any boots, the writer. He's in a bit of a poor, dismal state. But not only that, his cries actually kind of are bootless because they've got no legs, they've got no protection, they've got no carry, they've got no, like heaven is deaf, so obviously his cries will not make their way up there. They're completely bare and stripped and useless. I love that poetry can do that, and that's just one aspect of one line in one poem. Like I could deconstruct that whole line, trouble, death, heaven with my bootless cries, for an hour, and we still have all the rest of the sonnet to deal with as well. I think it's a lovely, and to be honest, if you know anything about sonnets, you'll know just how hard it is to make a sonnet this perfect. So Shakespeare was a complete master. Let's look at another one, just one more, and we'll wrap it up. This one's Sonnet 20, and it goes like this. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted, hast thou the master mistress of my passion. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false women's fashion. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. A man in hue, or hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature as she wrought thee fell a doting, and by addition me of thee defeated, by adding one thing to my purpose, nothing. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. And what's interesting, there's always been debate about Shakespeare's sexuality, like it's any of our business. And people have struggled to come to any definite conclusions, because if you look at his plays, although Shakespeare basically did create personality, and plays never had such definite personalities up until that point, no literature did, you don't really see much of Shakespeare's personality, if anything. He is all over the map on all topics, back and forth in different characters' voices. But when we get to the sonnets, we do start seeing a glimpse of personality and a glimpse of who he might have been. And one aspect of this is the fact that many believe that he was writing to a dude here. And a lot of people would say that every sonnet was written to a male lover, not his wife or a woman. It was to a man. And some idea that this could be true is he's basically saying you're more beautiful than a woman. Now, of course, he could be saying that to a woman. He could say you rise above, feminine nature and you're more beautiful than all of that. But it really is quite deliberately slippery, and there is definitely an argument, a case to be made that he is addressing this to a man. And he says, well, a woman's face with nature's own hand painted, hast thou the master mistress of my passion. So the fact you've got a duality here. He's not just calling the recipient of the poem mistress, it's master mistress. So he's saying you are a master, but with the feminine graces, but more than the feminine graces. I'm not going to make any speculation on this. All I'm going to do is comment upon a small linguistic, poetic technique that I think is quite delightful. Now, most of Shakespeare's sonnets end on a strong masculine beat, okay? Whereas these end on a feminine ending. That means that the final syllable of each line is unstressed. So instead of ending his first line on hand, he ends it on painted. Not paint. Paint would be strong and masculine. Id. That's feminine because it's weak. And yep, that might sound sexist, but that's just the terminology of writing poetry. And the same with passion. Passion, acquainted, fashion, rolling, gazeth, ing, ith, it, ing, id, ing, je. I like that. What he's doing is, with language and with poetic technique, he's deliberately using feminine endings in order to conjure up the feminine, regardless of whether he's talking to a woman or not. If he's talking to a man. Anyway, just a quick little reading of three Shakespeare sonnets that I like. If you'd like to hear some more, chat about some more, let me know. And let me know, what is your favourite Shakespearean sonnet? Drop in the comments below.